I died from a medical accident. No, I should say, I died from a carefully orchestrated murder. On the operating table, I was only undergoing a routine kidney stone surgery, but after being anesthetized, I never woke up. In the last second before death, I heard a conversation outside the door. She's finally dead. That kidney can be used for the young lady now. Keep your voice down. Go inform the madam quickly. Say it was a surgical accident, the patient was allergic to the anesthesia. It was my sister Bella's voice, and my fiancé Ethan. Allergic to anesthesia? I've had 7 surgeries and never had an allergic reaction. I wanted to scream, wanted to open my eyes, but my body felt nailed to the operating table, my consciousness fading away bit by bit. After I died, my soul drifted through the hospital for 7 days. I saw Bella transferred from the ICU to a regular ward, her complexion rosy, smiling like a flower. I saw Ethan holding her hand in the ward, saying, "From now on, you're the only daughter of the Winters family." I saw my mother, Victoria, dressed in a black suit, signing the death certificate with a blank expression, then turning around to book a flight to Paris. Not a single tear. I also saw the truth. Bella is not my biological sister. She is the daughter of my mother's first love. To cover it up, my mother brought her back from the orphanage and told everyone she was adopted. And my fiancé Ethan was someone my mother arranged from the very beginning. His mission was to make me fall in love with him, and then, when I trusted him the most, help me die accidentally. Why? Because my mother needed a healthy kidney for Bella. And I, her own daughter, was nothing more than a walking organ bank from start to finish. I float in the air, watching my own cold body being wheeled into the morgue. 3 years. From 18 to 21, I naively believed that my mother truly wanted to make amends, truly wanted me to come home. In the end, I was just being fattened up for the slaughter. I was still immersed in the hatred of my past life when suddenly the world spun around me. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the crystal chandelier on the ceiling. It was the guest room of the Winters family's old mansion. I sat up abruptly and grabbed the phone from under the pillow. September 1st, 2019, 6:30 a.m. I'm back. Back to the day it all began. On this day in my past life, the Winters family came to take me home. I grew up at my grandmother's house in the countryside, and before I turned 18, my mother had never come to see me even once. On my 18th birthday, a black sedan pulled up in front of my grandmother's house. A woman in a Chanel suit stepped out and said she was my mother, here to take me home. I thought she had finally remembered me. I thought she came for me out of guilt. I followed her back to the city and moved into the Winters family's old mansion. My mother threw a lavish welcome banquet for me, announcing to the world that I was her long-lost biological daughter. Everyone said Lady Victoria was a wonderful mother, who never stopped searching for her daughter. Only I knew that after the banquet, what she said to me was, "If you're going to live at home, follow the rules. Don't embarrass me." Then came Bella. She wore a white dress, smiled gently and delicately, took my hand and said, "Sister, welcome home. I finally have a sister." At the time, I thought she genuinely liked me. Later, I found out she genuinely liked my kidney. Then came Ethan. The family friend of the Winters, heir to the Carter Group, handsome, soft-spoken, and fell in love with me at first sight. Mother said it was a good match, that someone of my background marrying into the Carter family was a blessing earned from a past life. I believed her. I fell in love with him. And then I died. Died on the operating table he had arranged. "Miss, the madam requests you come downstairs for breakfast," came the maid's voice from outside the door, exactly as it had in my past life. I took a deep breath and opened the door. At the end of the hallway, Mother stood at the top of the stairs, wearing a dark green morning robe, her hair pinned up immaculately. "Awake? Get yourself together. I'm taking you for a checkup today." She looked me up and down, her tone flat. "The countryside sure raised you sturdy." In my past life, those words stung for a long time. Now, I just smiled. A checkup? More likely a matching test. Sure, Mom, I replied obediently. As I came downstairs, Bella was already sitting at the dining table. A white dress, her hair tied in a ponytail, a bowl of plain congee in front of her. She sipped it slowly, like a little rabbit. Good morning, sis. She looked up, her eyes sparkling. Did you sleep well last night? Pretty well. I sat down and picked up a slice of toast. That's good. She lowered her head, her voice soft. I was worried you might have trouble sleeping in a new bed. Mother came downstairs, glanced at the bowl of congee in front of Bella, and frowned. Why are you eating so little? Mom, I don't really have an appetite. Bella forced a smile. My mother said nothing more and turned to me. Eat more, you have blood drawn for the checkup today. Blood drawn. So it really was for the matching test. I lowered my head and bit into the toast, hiding the smile at the corner of my mouth. In my past life, I didn't know Bella was sick. I thought it was just a routine checkup, so I obediently had my blood drawn and dutifully handed over the matching report. In this life, I won't be foolish anymore. After breakfast, my mother personally drove me to the hospital. There were only the two of us in the car, and for the first time, she spoke to me. When you were little, I couldn't bring you back because I was in a divorce lawsuit with your father, and I was afraid you'd get caught up in it. You don't blame me, do you? No, I shook my head. Mom must have had her reasons. She smiled with satisfaction and reached out to pat my head. Her hand was ice cold, without a trace of warmth. At the hospital, the nurse drew 2 vials of my blood. I stared at the dark red liquid and thought, this life's medical report is going to be very interesting. Last night, I went to another hospital. Not to swap the blood samples, given my current circumstances, I had no way of tampering with the hospital's test specimens. But I did something much simpler. I found Bella's real medical records. She had a complete history of treatment at the nephrology department of the City Central Hospital, 12 years of medical history, clear and detailed. And last night, under the pretext of being a relative making inquiries, I obtained a copy of her medical records. Then I went to a private investigator and paid the deposit with the New Year's money my grandmother had secretly given me. I need to investigate 3 things. First, who Bella's biological father is. Second, the evidence of my mother swapping the babies back then. Third, what role Ethan actually played in all of this. In my past life, I died too confused. In this life, I will see everyone's true face clearly before I make my move. The medical report came out 3 days later. That evening, for the first time in a long while, my mother didn't go out for social engagements and sat in the living room waiting for me. Bella was also on the sofa, her eyes red, as if she had been crying. Ethan was there too, surprisingly. Dressed in a suit and tie, he sat across from my mother, holding a coffee cup, his posture as elegant as a painting. I changed my shoes and walked over. Mom, what's wrong? Sit down. My mother pointed to the sofa across from her. I obediently sat down, glanced at Bella, then at Ethan, looking completely bewildered. Sister. Bella's voice trembled as she spoke. My kidney, there's something wrong with my kidney, and I might need a transplant. Mom was hoping you could get tested to see if you're a match. With that, her tears fell, pitiful and delicate. That's exactly how she acted in my past life too. She wept, saying she didn't want to trouble her sister, that she couldn't bear to see her suffer, that she'd rather die than let me donate a kidney. I was utterly moved and said on the spot, I'm willing. Then she smiled. Tears still clinging to her face, she smiled anyway. In this life, I said nothing. The living room fell silent for a few seconds. Bella looked up at me through tearful eyes, as if waiting for me to say those 3 words, I am willing. Ethan also turned to look at me, his gaze gentle and encouraging. Mother lifted her teacup, took a sip, and said in an indifferent tone, You're her sister. Saving her is only right. Only right? I almost laughed out loud. Mom, I lowered my head, twisting the hem of my clothes. I'm willing, I really am. But I heard that donating a kidney requires a matching test. What if my match isn't successful? Let's check first before we talk about that. Mother set down her teacup. And if the match is successful, do I have to donate? I lifted my head, meeting her eyes. Mother paused, clearly not expecting me to ask that question. Don't you want to save your sister? Ethan interjected, his tone gentle but carrying a sense of pressure. I do want to save her, I said. But I'm also scared. I heard donating a kidney is a major surgery, it leaves a scar, and you can't do strenuous exercise afterward. I haven't even been to college yet, haven't fallen in love, haven't. Enough, my mother cut me off. Let's get tested first. Stop overthinking here. She stood up and went upstairs. Bella sat on the sofa, tears still on her face, but her eyes had changed. They were no longer weak, they were cold. Ethan glanced at me, his eyes filled with scrutiny and calculation, but none of the deep affection from my past life. I lowered my head, pretending to wipe away tears, but couldn't help the corners of my mouth from curling up. In this life, I won't be a fool anymore. 3 days later, the private investigator sent me the first report. Bella's biological father is named Marcus Reed, her mother's college sweetheart. Marcus Reed isn't dead. He was imprisoned for fraud 15 years ago and only released 3 years ago. Now he lives in a shantytown on the outskirts of the city, an alcoholic with no steady income. Interesting. In my past life, I always thought Bella's biological father was dead. I never expected him to still be alive, and living so miserably at that. If Mother knew Marcus Reed was still alive, would she be afraid? A convicted con artist, a repeat offender, who could pop up at any moment and claim, the eldest miss of the Winters family is my daughter. For now, I'll keep this piece of intelligence to myself. I'll release it when the time is right. The second report is still under investigation, regarding the witness who swapped babies back then. The private investigator said he found a former maternity ward nurse, but she has immigrated to Canada, and it will take time to get in touch with her. I'm not in a hurry. In this life, I have all the time in the world. In the second week of living at the Winters house, Ethan started showing up frequently. Every morning, he would happen to pick me up for school, and after school, he would just so happen to be waiting at the school gates. On weekends, he took me out to eat, watch movies, and go shopping. He was courteous to the servants, gentle and pleasant to me, as flawless as a character straight out of a romance novel. In my past life, I was completely bewitched by his act. In this life, I notice all the details. He never let me go to Carter's house. Every time I said I wanted to visit his parents, he would say, "My mom isn't feeling well, it's not convenient to have guests," or "My dad is on a business trip." He never talked to me about his past. When I asked him where he grew up as a child, he said, "I studied abroad." When I asked him what he liked, he said, "I like being with you." All clichés, not a single truthful word. What made me most suspicious was the strange understanding between him and Bella. It wasn't the kind of understanding between siblings, but rather, the kind between co-conspirators. Once, in the hallway, I saw Bella coming out of his room. When Bella saw me, her face turned pale instantly. "Sister, I came to borrow a book from Ethan." "Oh." I smiled. "What book are you borrowing?" It's. She couldn't get the words out. Ethan walked out of the room, holding a copy of macroeconomics in his hand. "This one. Bella said she's taking economics next semester and wants to borrow it to take a look." Too coincidental. Too natural. But I noticed that Bella wasn't holding anything in her hands. She wasn't here to borrow a book. She was here to discuss something with Ethan. I didn't call them out on it. I just smiled. "Well, you two talk. I'm heading back to my room." When I turned around, I saw Ethan let out a sigh of relief. What was he afraid of? In my past life, the code to the safe in my mother's study was Bella's birthday. In this life, I waited half a month before finally finding an opportunity. My mother went to a charity gala, Bella was resting in her room, and the servants were downstairs. I slipped into the study, turned off the lights, and put on gloves. A 6-digit combination lock. Bella's birthday is 0215. I tried it, no. Bella's birthday with the year, 021598, still no. My mother's birthday, wrong. I tried 3 times and didn't dare try again. Some safes trigger an alarm after 3 wrong attempts. I had to change my approach. In my past life, I saw my mother enter the password and vaguely remembered the sequence she'd pressed, left, right, left. It wasn't a birthday. It was some date. The date my mother got together with Marcus Reed? I didn't know. I gave up on this operation. But I wasn't in a hurry. The safe wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the evidence. I could afford to wait. A month after moving into the Winters home, the school held a parent-teacher conference. In my past life, my mother never attended a single one for me. This life is no different. She had the driver take me to school, saying, "I'm too busy, just let Henry go." When I arrived at school, I found Bella was also there. She was wearing a school uniform, her hair tied in a ponytail, looking no different from any ordinary high school student. But she wasn't a student at our school. She had come to keep her sister company. At the parent-teacher conference, the teacher praised my grades. 3rd in the class, top 20 in the grade. For a student who had transferred from the countryside, this result was already quite impressive. It's really remarkable that Sophia achieved this score right after transferring, the teacher said. Bella sat beside me, her smile gentle, but her hands were clenched white under the table. After the parent-teacher conference ended, she linked her arm through mine and said in a sweet voice, "You're amazing, big sister. I've been frail since I was little, and my grades have never caught up. Mom always compares me to you." "You're pretty amazing too," I said. "You can dance." "I can't. That's the only thing I know how to do." She sighed, then suddenly changed the subject. "Sis, is there someone you like?" "No." "What about Ethan?" "I think he's really good to you." I turned to look at her. Her eyes were sincere, so sincere it seemed like she genuinely cared about her sister's romantic life. But I knew she was probing. "Ethan?" I laughed. "He's been really good to me." "But he's your friend, right? You knew him first." "He's the son of Mom's friend, I've known him since childhood." Bella lowered her head. "He's nice to everyone, not just to you, sis." That was beautifully said. On the surface, it was a reminder not to flatter myself. In reality, it was meant to lower my guard. "Don't worry, he's not after you. He's like this with everyone." "I understand," I nodded. "Thanks for the reminder, little sister." She smiled. I smiled too. We were laughing at different things. In the 2nd month, the private investigator finally got in touch with the maternity ward nurse who had emigrated to Canada. The old lady was 75 years old, living out her retirement in Vancouver. The private investigator flew over and talked with her for 3 days, obtaining the records from back then. Not the originals, those were in the Winters family's safe. It was the nurse's testimony. She said that back then, Victoria Winters gave birth to twin daughters. But when she left the hospital, she only took one with her. The other was sent to the countryside, to be raised by an elderly woman. The nurse found it strange at the time, but Victoria gave her a hush payment, so she kept quiet. 3 years ago, someone came looking for her, asking about what happened back then. It was also someone from the Winters family. They gave her a sum of money and had her immigrate to Canada. "Who came to see you?" I asked the private detective. She said it was a young man, surnamed Carter. "Ethan Carter." 3 years ago, Ethan was only 18, and he had already started helping his mother clean up evidence. This marriage arrangement was probably settled back then. I stared at the report for a long time. 18, barely an adult, already starting to handle dirty business for an older woman. Ethan Carter, what exactly are you after? In my past life, my grandmother was my only family. She raised me, put me through school, and never told me when she was sick, afraid I would worry. On the day I turned 18 and was taken away by my mother, my grandmother stood at the door, holding my hand, and said, "The city is different from the countryside. Take good care of yourself. If your mother isn't good to you, you can always come back." I smiled and promised her, saying I would be fine. Then I never went back. My mother wouldn't let me, saying, "That countryside place, don't go there, it'll make people laugh at us." I believed her. When my grandmother called, my mother would say, "Sophia is practicing the piano and can't come to the phone." I never even got to see Grandma one last time. She passed away 3 years ago. A sudden heart attack. By the time she was rushed to the hospital, it was already too late. My mother didn't tell me. She didn't even go to the funeral. This time around, I won't let her get away with it. In the second week after moving into the Winters house, I called Grandma. "Grandma, I'm doing fine here. Don't worry about me. Are you really okay?" Grandma's voice was very soft. "Your mother, is she good to you?" "Okay," I said. "She bought me a lot of new clothes and sent me to the best school." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That's good," Grandma said. "If you're unhappy, just come back. Grandma will be waiting for you at home." I hung up the phone and lay on the bed, crying for a long time. "Grandma, I'm sorry. In my past life, I never got to take good care of you. In this life, I will protect you. I will take back everything my mother owes you." In the 3rd month, I began to close the net. The first step was to bring Grandma to the city. Not to the Winters house. I rented a small place on the outskirts and hired a caretaker to look after her. Mother doesn't know. The servants don't know either. Only Grandma and I know. Step 2, I had the nurse's testimony notarized and saved 3 copies. One was kept with the lawyer, one in the bank safe deposit box, and one was mailed to the old lady in Canada, asking her to hand the testimony over to the media in case something happened to me. Step 3, I started investigating Ethan's mother. The private investigator gave me a report. Ethan's mother was named Lillian, and she passed away 3 years ago. But there was something wrong with her death record. The cause of death was listed as cancer, but her attending physician had said something strange in an interview. Mrs. Lillian had always been in good health. None of us expected her to go so soon. Go so soon from what? From dying? Or from being made to die? I had to find out. The 4th month arrived, and it was Bella's birthday. Mother decided to throw a grand celebration. Nearly the entire business circle was invited, including all of Winters and Carter's partners. The party was held in the garden of the Winters family's old estate. Bella wore a pink dress, her hair pinned up, with a pearl necklace. She looked just like a little princess. I wore a simple black dress, standing silently in a corner, a glass of champagne in hand. Ethan walked over to me. "You're very quiet today," he said. "I'm thinking about something." "What about?" "About you." I turned to look at him. "I'm thinking about who you really are." He paused for a moment, then smiled. "Your fiancé." "Is that so?" I swirled my glass. "Then why don't you dare to take me to meet your parents?" "My mother passed away, and my father is in poor health." "So you're an orphan?" The smile on his face froze. "Sophia, what's wrong with you today?" "Nothing." I took a sip of champagne. I just suddenly figured something out. "Figured what out?" "Why you've been so good to me." The banquet began, and my mother was speaking on stage. I didn't have time to respond. But Ethan's face no longer looked as composed as before. Halfway through the banquet, an uninvited guest appeared. A middle-aged man, wearing a shabby suit, unshaven, reeking of alcohol. He climbed over the wall to get in. The security guard stopped him, and he shouted, "I want to see my daughter. I am Bella's biological father." The entire venue fell silent. My mother's face instantly turned pale. Bella stood on stage, her lips trembling. Who are you? I don't know you." "I'm your father," the man struggled. "Marcus Reed. Didn't your mother tell you? You're my daughter." The banquet hall erupted. Some whispered among themselves, others pulled out their phones to take pictures. The mother quickly walked over to the man, said a few words in a low voice. The man froze, then nodded and was led away by security. "I'm sorry, everyone. Just a madman, I've already had security handle it," the mother said with a smile to the guests. "Please, carry on. Don't let this affect you." But the atmosphere was already beyond repair. I saw Ethan standing in the corner, his face dark. He looked at me. It wasn't suspicion in his eyes, it was certainty. He knew it was me. Yes, it was me. I was the one who brought Marcus Reed here. At first, he didn't want to come, saying he had no desire to get involved with the Winters family. I gave him $500,000. He said he wasn't Bella's father? No, he is. I had a DNA test done, 99.99% match. Back then, his mother lied to get rid of him, claiming the child didn't survive, making him believe Bella was dead. He had no idea his daughter was still alive, let alone that she was now the young lady of the Winters family. When I told him the truth, he cried. A man in his 50s, crouched on the ground, wept for 10 minutes. Then he said, "I'll go. Not for the money. I want to see my daughter." I gave him the address and told him the time. The rest was up to him. Marcus Reed's arrival was like a bomb dropped into the Winters household. The next day, every newspaper's headline read, "The Winters' eldest daughter's biological father appears and Lady Victoria's secret lover." The mother's lawyer issued an urgent statement, claiming that Marcus Reed was a deranged stranger with no connection to her. But no one believed it. Because the media dug up more dirt. 15 years ago, Marcus Reed was convicted of fraud, and his victim was one of the Winters family's suppliers. While he was in prison, Victoria deposited money into his prison account every month. These transfer records were obtained by a private investigator from inside the bank. The mother was left speechless, unable to defend herself. Bella had it even worse. She had grown up believing she was a Winters heiress, looking down on everyone from her high horse. Now, out of nowhere, a convicted fraudster turned out to be her biological father. Her classmates mocked her, and even the teachers looked at her differently. When she got home, she locked herself in her room, smashing things and cursing. "Why did you have to come? You've ruined everything for me." She wasn't yelling at Marcus Reed. She was yelling at me. Because I was standing at her bedroom door, hearing her rage. "Sophia, it was you, wasn't it?" She opened the door, her eyes red and swollen. "You're the one who brought him here." "I don't know what you're talking about." I smiled. "Maybe you should ask your mother what really happened back then." "You." "Bella, don't be mad." I patted her on the shoulder. "Anyway, you'll have a kidney soon. Once the surgery is done, you'll still be the young lady of the Winters family." She froze. "You're willing to donate a kidney?" I didn't say that. I turned and walked away. I said your mom will find a kidney donor for you. After all, she loves you that much. Bella stood in the hallway, her face deathly pale. She knew her mother wouldn't find a kidney donor. She had been on dialysis for 12 years and had already exhausted every possible donor. The only match was me. And I wasn't going to donate. After the Marcus Reed incident, Ethan started avoiding me. He stopped picking me up for school, stopped calling, and even stopped attending my mother's parties. What was he afraid of? That I'd trace it back to him? I decided to turn up the heat. I asked him to meet me at a cafe. He came, but it was clearly against his will. "Ethan, long time no see." I smiled as I greeted him. "What is it?" He sat down, his tone cold. "I want to ask you something." "Speak." "How did your mother die?" His hand trembled. "Cancer," he said. 3 years ago." "Is that so?" I pulled a document from my bag. "I have an interview transcript here with your mother's attending physician. He said your mother's health had always been good, and he never expected her to go so quickly." "What do you think he meant by that?" Ethan stared at the document, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sophia, what exactly are you trying to say?" "I want to say, your mother didn't die of illness, did she?" Silence. A long silence. Then Ethan laughed. Not a gentle laugh, but the kind of laugh you let out when you're backed into a corner and decide to just throw caution to the wind. "You're smart," he said. "Smarter than I thought." "So?" "So I won't underestimate you anymore." He stood up. "But that doesn't mean you've won. Sophia, you have no idea who you're up against." "I do." I stood up as well. "I'm up against a bunch of murderers." His eyes narrowed. "My mother killed your mother, didn't she?" I said quietly. "Because your mother knew her secret, the secret about Bella, the secret about the baby swap. So she had to die." Ethan said nothing. But the hand gripping his coffee cup had white knuckles. "Ethan, you're working for a murderer. Do you really think you'll come out of this unscathed?" I picked up my bag. "She killed your mother. You're next." "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm not talking nonsense." I looked him in the eye. "You know it in your heart." I left. Ethan remained sitting alone in the cafe, staring blankly at the cup of coffee that had already gone cold. I didn't know if he would turn against me. But I knew that the seed I had planted in his heart was already there. Now, it was just a matter of when it would sprout. The Marcus Reed incident festered for a month, and Mother's situation grew worse by the day. Winter's family's stock price dropped by 30%, and 3 directors demanded her resignation. Grandfather called from the suburban villa, asking her to come home and explain herself. She went. When she returned, her eyes were red. "Your grandfather wants me to hand over the company," she said to me. "To you." I was stunned. "Me?" "Yes, you." She looked at me, her gaze complicated. "He thinks you have a head for business, better at managing than I am. In my past life, Grandpa never gave me a second glance. In this life, I haven't done anything, why would he suddenly want to give me the company?" "No, I have done something. I've done a lot, but he just couldn't see it. I had a private detective steal the Winters family's financial reports from the past 3 years and analyzed them thoroughly. The Winters group appears prosperous on the surface, but in reality, it is drowning in debt. My mother treats the company like an ATM, while Ethan's Carter group has been bleeding it dry from behind the scenes. Though my grandfather has stepped back from management, he's no fool. He knows the company is nearly hollowed out and needs someone truly capable to clean up the mess. And that someone is me. In my past life, I never had the chance to prove myself, I was killed before I could even show what I was made of. In this life, I made sure my grandfather saw my worth ahead of time. How did I pull it off? It was simple. Using memories from my past life, I predicted the stock price trends of 3 companies and made a few investments through an anonymous account. In 3 months, I earned $5 million. Then I anonymously sent my grandfather a letter. Inside the envelope were investment proposals for those 3 companies, along with screenshots of my investment returns. There was only one sentence in the letter: if the Winters Group wants to survive, find someone who knows how to invest to run it. My grandfather didn't know it was me. But he began to notice me. He saw my grades at school, saw that I never caused trouble at home, and saw that I remained polite even in the face of my mother's coldness. He felt that this granddaughter was well-mannered, composed, and sharp-minded. So, at the most difficult moment for her mother, he made a decision. Let Sophia Winters take over the Winters Group. Not as the chairman, but as the vice-chairman, assisting her mother from the sidelines. Yet everyone knew that the vice-chairman position was merely a transition. The real power had already begun to shift. On her 18th birthday, her mother reluctantly announced, Sophia Winters officially assumes the role of vice-chairman of the Winters Group. The ceremony was simple, no flowers, no cake, no guests. Only her grandfather's lawyer came to read the appointment letter. My mother stood off to the side, her face deathly pale. Bella sat in a wheelchair, her kidney disease was growing worse, and she could no longer stand for long. Ethan never showed up. Congratulations. My mother handed me a glass of champagne. But you'd better not get too excited. The situation at Winters Group is far worse than you think. I know. I took the champagne. That's exactly why I'm taking over. My mother stared at me, as if searching for something in my expression. She found nothing. Because I was telling the truth. Of course I knew Winters Group was on the verge of collapse. That's precisely why I wanted to take charge. Only by reviving a dying company can I prove my ability. Only by reviving a dying company can I earn my grandfather's complete trust. Only by reviving a dying company can I make my mother realize, the daughter she abandoned is 100 times better than her. In my first week as head of the company, I did something my mother never dared to do. I audited the books. The Winters Group's accounts were in a shockingly chaotic state. Over the past 3 years, more than $200 million in funds had flowed into several shell companies under the Carter Group. On paper, they were investments, but in reality, not a single one had generated any returns. Ethan was bleeding the Winters Group dry. I had the legal department send a cease and desist letter, demanding that the Carter Group return all the funds. Ethan called, his voice lowered to a near whisper, Sophia, are you really going to burn this bridge? Is there even a bridge between us to burn? I said. You know exactly how much you took from Winters. Return it within 3 days, or I'll hand the accounts over to the Economic Crime Investigation Unit. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Fine, he said. You win. The next day, the Carter Group returned $50 million. As for the rest, they said they needed time to sort out their cash flow. I wasn't in a hurry. I just made a copy of the accounts and sent it to Grandpa. After reading, Grandpa was silent for a long time. Ethan, I watched that boy grow up, he said. I never thought he'd do something like this. It wasn't him, I said. It was Victoria. Ethan was just the executor. Grandpa's face grew even darker. Your mother, what exactly is she trying to do? She wants to drain Winters dry and replace it with the Carter Group. I paused. But the Carter Group doesn't belong to Ethan either. Ethan is just an adopted son of the Carter family, he has no right of inheritance. Grandpa's eyes narrowed. How do you know? I looked it up. He didn't ask me how I looked it up. He just nodded and said, You're smarter than your mother. Coming from Grandpa, that was the highest praise. 3 months after taking over the company, Bella's condition completely deteriorated. She was admitted to the hospital, undergoing dialysis every day. The doctor said if she didn't get a kidney transplant, she might not survive more than 6 months. My mother came to the company to see me. Sophia, your sister is dying. I know. Can't you save her? How can I save her? Donate a kidney. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading, but more commanding. You're her sister. You're a match. If you don't donate, who will? A match? I laughed. I remember the last test said we weren't compatible. My mother froze for a moment. That was a mistake in the previous report. I had it rechecked. You're a match. Is that so? I pulled a report from the drawer and tossed it onto the table. These are matching reports from 3 different hospitals. Every single one shows that Bella and I are not a match. Mother's face turned pale. When did you do this? During the first week I moved into the Winters house. I stood up. The matching report you had done for me was fake. You knew from the very beginning that Bella and I weren't a match. But you still brought me back, didn't you? Why? Because you needed my organs, not just a kidney, but my liver, my heart, and my corneas too. Mother took a step back. What are you talking about? I'll say it. I walked up to her. You never planned to let me leave here alive from the very beginning. Bella wants my kidney, Ethan wants Winter's money, and you want an organ donor you can dispose of at will. 3 years ago, that's exactly how you killed Lillian, isn't it? Mother's pupils contracted sharply. How do you know about Lillian? I know more than you think, I said. Lillian wasn't killed by you, it was Ethan. He injected his mother with an overdose of insulin and disguised it as death from cancer. And you helped him cover up the truth. You want to ask how I know? I laughed. Ethan told me. That was a lie. Ethan didn't tell me. It was the private investigator who found a loophole in Lillian's death records. Her insulin prescription had been signed off by Ethan. An 18-year-old boy signing off on his mother's insulin prescription? That didn't add up. Unless he didn't want anyone to know what medication his mother was taking. I followed that thread and discovered that a week before Lillian's death, Ethan had picked up 3 times the usual amount of insulin from the hospital. Does a cancer patient really need this much insulin? No. So Ethan is lying. Lillian didn't die of cancer, she died of an insulin overdose. And I bet my mother knows it. Now, looking at her expression, I've won that bet. I'm not donating a kidney, I said. And I'm not helping you cover up what happened to Lillian. You have 2 choices now. 1, turn yourself in to the police and confess to conspiring with Ethan to kill Lillian. 2, I'll turn you in myself. My mother collapsed into the chair. You can't. I'm your mother. Now you remember I'm your daughter? I laughed. Too late. Mother chose to turn herself in. Not because her conscience had awakened, but because she knew the evidence I held was enough to put her behind bars for 20 years. She confessed to everything. Swapping the babies, concealing Bella's true identity, conspiring with Ethan to murder Lillian, falsifying my matching report, and plotting to make me accidentally die to harvest my organs. Every single charge was enough to bury her. When Bella heard the news at the hospital, she fainted on the spot. After waking up, her first words were, "Sophia, are you satisfied now?" "Not satisfied," I said. "You're not dead yet." She glared at me, her eyes filled with hatred. "You'll burn in hell." "Hell?" I laughed. "I've already been there once. This time, it's your turn." Ethan ran. Before I could find the police, he had vanished. The private investigator said he went to South America, taking the last remnants of the Carter Group's money with him. I didn't chase after him. Because I knew he would spend the rest of his life living in fear. Afraid that I would find him. Afraid that the police would find him. Afraid that anyone who knew his secrets would find him. Living like that is worse than death. 1 year later. Winters Group's stock price had tripled. Using the memories from my past life, I invested in new energy and artificial intelligence, riding the wave of opportunity. Grandfather completely handed over control, giving me both the chairman and CEO positions. An 18-year-old chairman. The entire business world was talking about me. Some called me a genius, some called me a madman, and some said I was the only hope left for the Winters family. I didn't care what they said. I only cared about one thing, revenge. No, not revenge. It was collecting debts. What my mother owed my grandmother, what Bella owed me, what Ethan owed the Winters family. Every single debt, I collected. Not too much, just enough. Grandma lives with me in the city, making me soup every day, saying I'm too thin. I smile and drink the soup, feeling that the greatest happiness in this life is still having her. Sometimes I dream of my past life. I dream of the coldness on the operating table, of the words I heard just before I died. Then I wake up and realize it was all a dream. The sunlight outside the window is beautiful. I turn over and go back to sleep. In this life, no one can hurt me again. Because I am no longer that naive country girl who knew nothing. I am Sophia Winters, chairman of the Winters Group. Reborn once, I learned the most important thing: it's not forgiveness, it's striking back. It's not letting go, it's taking back. It's not forgetting, it's making them remember forever. I picked up the soup my grandmother had simmered, took a sip, and smiled. It was truly fragrant.